A stronger day, be your best every day. Hi, I'm Adimus, founder and director of Strong Optimizer. I aim to help you stay healthy, be happier, and deal with challenges with greater resilience. Have you heard of positive existential coaching? How does it differ from other forms of coaching? Today, you will meet Yannick Jacob from England. Yannick will unpack for you how positive existential coaching can help you achieve happiness, success, and fulfillment by embracing the trials and tribulations in your life. Thank you. Hi, I'm Dimas, founder and director of Strong Optimizer. Thank you for watching Strong Optimizer's The Science Up Your Wellbeing series. Today, we have Yannick Jacob joining us all the way from London. Yannick, yes, is existential life and leadership coach, a positive psychologist, a coach trainer, and supervisor, and a mediator. He is the program director of the accredited certificate in integrative coaching at the School of Positive Transformation. And he was the program leader of the Master of Science in Coaching Psychology at the University of East London. His love for coaching, positive existential philosophy, and personal development is contagious. He loves to challenge people to think, learn, and grow, and explore the big questions in life, and appreciate the whole spectrum of what life has to offer. I'm so grateful to have you today, Yannick. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing super well. I always love to be in relation and in conversation. And as we've already chatted a little bit, I'm looking forward to learn something together. You know, you, me, and whoever might be listening to this today.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Well, once again, thank you for taking the time to share your nuggets of wisdom in positive existential coaching, particularly how people can achieve happiness, success, and fulfillment by embracing the anxiety, uncertainties, and pains in life. Before that, I think that we have to congratulate one another because great men think alike. Both of us are wearing the pink shirt today without intentional coordination.
I think there's a special name for this color, but I think there's a stereotype that men can't really tell shades of colors apart. Yeah. Fun fact, I did a color consultation because I met a person who owns a color consultation company, and I was curious, but I didn't want to pay for it, so she invited me to be a model on one of her training sessions.
Wow.
And long story short, I actually experienced the difference in shades of color. I couldn't really tell them apart sometimes, but the experience of seeing yourself with a different color and all of a sudden your eyes pop out and your face falls in, you know, and all of a sudden, like, that was quite the experience. And it's interesting to make the differentiation between knowing something and experiencing something. Now I have my wow colors, and I actually like shopping now. Before I didn't like to go shopping, and now I'm like, oh yeah, I know this is going to suit me really well. So I think we might have the same color here.
That's right. I see that, you know, eye has been open, you know, when you're talking about different shades of color, but also I guess that sometimes the lingo or the vocab to be able to identify different shades of color, I think that itself also can be quite challenging for most people too. You know, but anyway, today we're not. There's
a different conversation you need to have with you know, the link between color and well-being, or the difference between what people wear and how they feel in it. So there's a whole nother conversation. And I know some of my former students at UAL, there was one, I forgot her name, I wish I could remember her name. She was exploring fashion and well-being, and I'm sure color plays into that quite a lot.
I'm sure too. But unfortunately, today we're not going to talk about color, but we're going to talk about something called, which is a big word, you know, which is positive existential coaching. But before we dive into that, I'm curious to find out, like, what are some of your primary beliefs or philosophies that guide and govern who you are and what you do as a coach or as a person?
Oh, a little question like that. Well, I think a core driver that came into this is my love of learning and my curiosity. And I think these are two fantastic characteristics of a coach, because essentially we're creating a space where we want to help somebody learn. And the best way to help somebody learn, I think, is to be really curious, because curiosity is very contagious. You know, anytime, everybody who's spent some time around a toddler, I think it's very difficult not to get sucked into the toddler's curiosity of exploring the world. So that's definitely something that drives me. And it's then later I came in touch with VIA and strength profiles and the general strength theory from positive psychology. Yeah. And then throughout supervising and training so many coaches, I realized that is one of the top strengths that most coaches have. Yeah. And so this is one of the guiding kind of principles and driving forces in my work. There are many others that I could talk to, but perhaps I'll leave it at that for the time being.
Yeah. All right. So it sounds like, again, you are actually playing with your strengths or actually leveraging your strengths of curiosity. And because you talk about curiosity, perhaps can also create a window opportunity of wonders, of helping people to actually discover perhaps something that might not have discovered before.
And I think what plays into that, and I might be really worth mentioning in the context of philosophy, is that I had this, in strength of perspective, but that big picture thinking. I very naturally take a step back and look at the bigger picture. I look at systemic issues, or I look at the wider context in which not just the coaching takes place, but any situation is. And that is not always helpful. Sometimes you really want to get detailed about stuff, and that's something I have to consciously do. But in my coaching and my work, it really helps to take a step back and look at what else is around. And that helps us to integrate, for example, positive psychology and existentialism. If we look at things in isolation, it's very, very helpful. In science, we do that all the time. We look at certain aspects in isolation, and then we try to integrate it into the whole. Positive psychology in itself has done that. We looked at what's right with people, maybe not in isolation because it's a huge subject, but every topic within positive psychology and then positive psychology as a whole is still a tiny part of psychology. Compared to everything else. And Seligman always proposed that this is not supposed to be standing on its own. I think positive psychology has, many positive psychologists have tried to put boundaries around positive psychology and not look beyond. And so both in science as well as in coaching, and I think in coaching particularly, you want to look at the bigger picture. And if we're curious about the bigger picture and how this fits in, a very detailed person, or with a tendency to focus on the detail, might not have that awareness about it. So my natural curiosity about what's the bigger picture can be really helpful to make some connections.
Yeah. And as a coach, a lot of times, sometimes in general, almost like can become a very helpful mirror, or even like a sounding board for the people. All right, when you're talking about the integration, we look into the science, it's like experimenting, I guess, with different chemicals and elements, and as a result, it means that creating a whole new reactions, responses, or elements. And I think that's what I enjoy, and what you're doing to have the ability to integrate philosophy as well as positive psychology. So let's address the elephant in the room, in the sense that, as I mentioned earlier, for some people, positive existential coaching can be a big or fancy word. So let's, I guess, that set the scenes for our listeners out there. First, what is coaching? Second, what is positive existential coaching?
Again, huge questions. I love your questions. Let's try to put it in a nutshell. Let's start with coaching. Coaching is a huge umbrella term for a lot of different practices. And that's something that I didn't like at the beginning, because I was trained in a particular way of coaching, quite academically grounded, quite humanistic, person-centered, very facilitative. So that's where I came from. Coaching is to help somebody learn, not to give somebody knowledge or tell people how to do things. It's not to share theory or opinions. It's to create a space where somebody can think better, where somebody can acknowledge their feelings, where somebody can make sense of themselves in the world with an orientation towards the future, right? So it's partnering up with our clients to stand shoulder by shoulder, to be a fellow traveler, to help them with your curiosity and the safe space that you create with your questions that may be challenging or supporting, to help somebody navigate their life or their career, some of the big questions or some of the smaller questions. Help somebody move forward, often towards something quite specific, but not necessarily. Yeah. And that's generally the facilitative coaching process. Now, and a lot of coaches out there, they do offer their knowledge and their opinions, and they draw on their experience, and they offer tools or exercises in their toolbox. And especially, I think, in positive psychology coaching, coaches are more informed by the science, and some feel obligated to share some of the science. Yeah. So if somebody wants to be happier, my instinct would be to explore with them what happiness means to them. But you might also say, here's some science, here's PERMA, here's psychological well-being, here's subjective well-being. Here are the pillars that we know contribute to health, well-being, and happiness. What do you think? So we can do some assessments, we can do some questionnaires, we can guide our questions by what we know from the science. So maybe that gives a little bit of an understanding of what the range of coaching styles and approaches can be, from directive to quite facilitative, if we wanted to put it in that kind of spectrum, working with lots of tools or not working with any tools. All of these are valid coaching approaches. And I think what's important is that if anybody wants to talk with a coach or considers working with a coach, it's important to ask those questions to the coach. If the coach doesn't explain it already, it's like, how do you work? What am I going to get? What can you do? What can't you do? Or what will you do? And what won't you do? Because every coach has to frame their space in this helping by talking universe and say, this is the kind of coaching I do. This is kind of how it works. Do you want to do that sort of coaching? Or maybe I refer you to one of my colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's what I call, whether you call it professional or ethical or responsible coaching, basically by explaining very clearly and intentionally to persons who are coming to us for coaching in terms of the structure, process, expectations, goals. So at the end of the day, I understand that there's going to be the right match or the best fit for one another. And as cliche as it may sound, we understand that there's no one size fits all coaching. You're right. Some people may prefer a more directed type of coaching process.
Exactly. And we send our kids to school and we expect the teacher not necessarily to say, what do you want to learn about today? But we expect them to guide our kids and give them some of the knowledge. That's an important part of learning. And as a coach, some coaches have that learning aspect or that sharing information aspect to their work. Many therapists share information and do some psychoeducation too. There is a power in facilitating. There's a power in teaching and offering knowledge. So I think the coaching as a profession might go in all of these directions. Sometimes coaches teach, sometimes coaches mentor, sometimes coaches facilitate learning. Sometimes coaches, they're just being there and they hold space for you. And you could argue that each of those can be a profession on its own. No, you should call this mentoring. You should call this therapy when you're just holding space and you're being with somebody. And I think coaching can go into those areas. But if you spend all of your time there, then maybe reconsider what you call yourself. But in the end, it's an unregulated profession and everybody can do whatever they want. So I appreciate the work. That's why I think ethically it's so important that coaches are able to formulate with a degree of clarity what's the service that they offer. And I'm very appreciative that sometimes we have a structure or process in mind, and the conversation just doesn't go that way, because what the client really needs is to hold some space to explore who they are and what they want. And every coach needs to make a decision where is the boundary at which point you might refer to a mentor or to a therapist or to a consultant or to a teacher.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess understanding every individual coach needs to understand their own levels of competency and professional boundary, and knowing how and when is the best time for me to refer out, especially when we talk about coaching in general, it's unregulated profession. It doesn't mean there's going to be a lot of bad coaches out there, but certainly I think that in order to when we use this strong word, protect, preserve the credential reputations for coaches who actually done lots of wonderful evidence-based training as compared to someone who just thinking that, okay, I can just do a couple of hours of online training and call myself a coach. And I think that you're right. Some people may rely on a lot of their personal experience, as an asset, as a tool, that because I've gone through many different types of life experiences, that means that I'm an excellent life coach. But certainly at the end of the day, personally, a professional, I believe that it's driven by the clients or the coaching's needs and goals. And at the end of the day, we say that do no harm.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of these coaches who call themselves coaches and they have life experience, for example, maybe they went through a bad breakup and now they coach people through their bad breakups. A lot of them provide a lot of value. So I used to judge, and say, no, you need to do training and you need to read the books and you need to inform yourself. Coaching psychology is a science. And as difficult as it is to research coaching, because, it's so dependent on the relationship and the relationship that you have with your client. If you give 10 different coaches the same 10 questions, they're going to ask them in 10 different ways. So you can still get to somewhere with a scientific method, but it's really difficult to research just because there's such a variety out there. So I used to say that, coaches need to be like that. They need to be informed. But really, there's a lot of coaches who draw on their experience and they're very directive and they offer a lot of value. Personally, I don't think that's coaching necessarily. I think that's some form of life mentoring. But I can't make the rules. So now I'm just sending the message out that, please look at your practice and reflect and be ethical and ask yourself questions. Ethics is not a set of rules, it's a set of questions you need to ask yourself continuously and then explain it to the client. And if the client wants to draw on your experience, on your life experience, and they want some advice, then it's fair to give it to them based on your experience. As long as you understand that your experience is not necessarily their experience, even though it sounds very similar in terms of bad breakup,
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you on that more. All right. So we have sort of unpacked a little bit of what is coaching. Okay. What about positive existential coaching? What exactly does it mean? What does it look like?
Well, what exactly is difficult to say, right? Because it's a framework, again, a smaller umbrella term for lots of different practices. So whatever kind of coach you are, in the context of what we just talked about, you can be informed by positive psychology and by existentialism. So I like to call them lenses. You have an existential lens on understanding your client and yourself in relation. You understand yourself in relation to the world, in relation to the client, and you understand better your client in relation to themselves and in the world. So there's an existential lens, there's a positive psychology lens. The positive psychology lens helps us to understand well-being, happiness, what's right with people, what resources do we bring, strength, hope theory, positive emotions, kindness, gratitude. All of these are helpful for us to guide our questions, perhaps, to be curious. If every client that has stepped foot in my coaching room wanted ultimately to be happier in some way or another in the context of the well-being theories out there. I mentioned PERMA and psychological well-being. If we look at what we know from science contributes to happiness and well-being, then every client ultimately wants that. They might come in and they want a promotion, or they want to find a job that feels better. They might want to feel less stressed, or they might want to lose weight. If you ask, once you have that thing that you want, how's your life different? What then? What does it give you? You can ask that question in a million different ways. But if you ladder it up, or if you go to the higher level goal or the deeper goal, depending on how you look at it, always, and I say that very rarely, but every time I do that, we get to good relationships, self-acceptance, autonomy, meaning, purpose, positive emotions, more engagement, flow, all of the elements of well-being, competence, environmental mastery, they're all there, some more, some less, but it's always related to some form of happiness. So that's why my positive psychology lens informs my coaching when I explore somebody's goal.
Yeah.
Because if we figure out the higher level goal, maybe we can go straight there. You know, you might still want the promotion, you might still want to lose the weight, but we're opening up possibilities of what we're doing in this space and how my client is going to get to what they want. And if they figure out what they really want, you know, what's behind the thing that they want, then maybe there is a shortcut, you know, maybe we don't waste a lot of time doing something that might not be the right thing to get you there. Yeah. You know, if losing the weight leads you to, you know, a sense of self-acceptance, or it lends you to, you know, finding a partner and having children and adding meaning to your life, you know, maybe you can add meaning to your life right now. And the research on meaning that we know from positive psychology might inform of what that might look like. Yeah. You know, so you can still lose the weight, you can still go that way, but often when people come to coaching, they feel stuck because what they've tried doesn't work. And then through our positive psychology lens, we might open up conversations and pathways for this client to move towards what they want in a more effective way.
Yeah. So sounds like, if I hear you correctly, Yannick is saying that sometimes when clients come to you for coaching, they tell you that, okay, this is my goals, this is what I want, this is my motivations. But throughout the process of coaching, you notice that sometimes the immediate goals may not necessarily be something they actually want, but they have a deeper levels of meaning or purpose, and you're able to uncover that, bring that into the surface. Then that's where we talk about maybe able to help the clients to have what they want right now, rather than they go through different pathways, as you use the word, perhaps taking some shortcut, right? Hear you clearly?
Yeah, shortcuts is a difficult word. It's a loaded word, right? Because I believe generally shortcuts don't really exist, at least towards sustainable happiness, right? But shortcuts do exist in that sense, is that if somebody wants to focus on, and that losing the weight is a good example. I mean, often, like, most of my clients don't come for losing weight, but occasionally it still happens, you know? And it's a shortcut in a sense that some people spend a lot of time working towards something that they think they want, you know? And maybe that's where my big picture perspective, and this is what philosophers often bring, that bigger picture perspective, is where that's coming in really, really handy. Because how many people spend time working towards something, and then once they get it, they're like, oh, that's what now? Like that kind of, not sure. And through the pandemic, I've seen that a lot in my coaching, that people came in and they were forced to pause, you know, because the industry came to a halt. You know, maybe they had to take a break from the job, or maybe they lost their job. Maybe they were on furlough and maybe the government helped and they had some free time. And quite a few of them started to consider, what have I been doing the last 20 years or 10 or 15? You know, this is not really a career that I like, you know, I used to be passionate about this, but now it's just something that I do in order to maintain the status quo. You know, actually, I wanted to move in a different direction, but then this job was offered to me and I took it because it made sense. You know, and I didn't have much time to decide, so I just kind of went with it. And I don't know, a child was on the way, or we just bought a new house, or, you know, it offered more stability. But actually, I don't think, I think I want passion much more than I want stability. You know, so lots of big questions came up and people started to reconsider, what am I actually doing here? And in that sense, we can maybe not waste time, but we can certainly spend time on things that are not as relevant to us. And we just kind of got drifted that way, you know, because life just kind of happens sometimes. We're not always fully aware of all of our choices, you know. So sometimes we find ourselves somewhere on a path and we don't have time to question because life is so busy and hectic. So coaching is often, as I see it, especially existential coaching, is an invitation to pause, you know, to maybe sit in this, to take a step back, to consider what's going on here and how am I doing things. And through that conversation, maybe there's an awareness that maybe my time is better spent in this direction. And then in that sense, you don't spend so much time walking the path I don't want to say the wrong path, but you know what I mean. Yeah. And we spend more time walking on the path that we really want. And that arguably is a shortcut towards what we really want, because we don't spend so much time over here walking in a different direction.
Yeah. So it's almost saying that, trying to draw a distinction is what I want versus what truly matters to me.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And there's no answer to that is universal, because it's individual, it's subjective. And that's why these conversations are so interesting, because I cannot say this is what makes you happy. This is the formula. What I can say is, for most people, most of the time, these things contribute. That's social science. We're 95% confident that within our sample, this made a difference, and we can say that's a significant finding. When somebody's sitting in front of you in coaching, they might just be the outlier. That's why it's difficult to over-rely on science. Yeah. Because in science, it's a accepted statistical method to eliminate the outlier from your data set. Mm-hmm. So if you have 1,000 people fill in your questionnaire and one is very different to all the others, it gets eliminated. It doesn't matter statistically. That's a common practice. That's valid, because somebody might just fill out the questionnaire at random. That's what it's for. So, I don't want to criticize it, but it's a thing. However, maybe this person didn't just fill out the questionnaire at random. Maybe they just think very differently. And that person might sit in front of you coming for coaching. So all of your science potentially goes out the window when you meet a person that's in front of you, because you always have to consider that might be the outlier to what I understand. So it's an interesting relationship between science and coaching. It's part art, part science, and we cannot over-rely on what we think we know. And philosophers have always questioned what we think we know. And that's why philosophy is an important guide for a coach. Again, not over-relying on it, but it invites us and encourages us to question what we think we know, to bracket our assumptions, and to really be present with where this person in front of you is going and what they're about.
I like the way that you framed it. Yes, there's a lot of values when it comes to scientific findings, or what we call evidence-based type of research, but it always potentially, possibly going to be one outlier out there. And it sort of reminds me of one of the phrases from Associate Professor Peggy Kern, which I know this assistant professor at the Center for Wellbeing Science, Melbourne Uni. I'm just paraphrasing her to say that even when it comes to the best of human science or social science research, the findings is only going to apply to some of the people, some of the cohort, some of the culture, some of the time. No matter how rigorous is the scientific research matters, because at the end of the day, we're talking about humans. We certainly are far more dynamic and complex and complicated. They can't be essentially captured either under the lab or some sort of questionnaires, as you put it.
Yeah. And that's a fantastic bridge. I like that much more than most of the people most of the time, by the way. But it's a fantastic bridge of what led me, after studying positive psychology, after my master's in applied positive psychology, I was drawn to the existential space. Because at the time I felt not just there were a lot of positive psychologists who were maybe a bit too positive and maybe too focused on what's right with people, which is valid and good. But as I said, with my big picture perspective, I was craving an approach to coaching that was acknowledging that life often is really hard. It's a challenge. It's full of suffering. It's full of anxiety. And we cannot escape that. So that's what drew me to existentialism. And I found a master's in existential coaching that I felt immediately drawn to, because it seems to cover a much larger range of the human experience. Sometimes people are not well. Sometimes somebody who's functioning really well goes through a really difficult time. Maybe having a breakdown, like having a really difficult experience. Doesn't mean they have a mental health issue. Doesn't mean there's a disorder or something. It just, means that the experience of humans can vary and come in waves. And sometimes you're asking yourself some really big questions, and there is a time period where there's a lot of suffering and a lot of challenge. And you're asking yourself big questions about life. And this is where existential philosophy has a lot to offer. Same thing, you can't over rely on it, but the nature of the existential questions is about what does it mean to be? What does it mean to just be there? Heidegger's Dasein literally means there being in German. What's the human experience of being in the world with other people? What do we experience just as a result of being human? That's the question that the philosophy is trying to entangle. And it's not something that we can measure. We can measure a lot more now. We can even measure the experience of meaning in some meaningful way. But that's why philosophy was huge when the scientific method wasn't as developed and as sophisticated. So the central question is, what does it mean to be, and what is this human condition? Yeah. Why does there always seem to be a baseline of anxiety based on some of these dilemmas and paradoxes and inner conflicts that we carry just as a result of being human? So that's what the philosophers arrived at, the existential philosophers and writers and thinkers such as Sartre and Heidegger and Camus, Kierkegaard and Denmark, Nietzsche, Simone de Beauvoir. Then later on, the therapists Rollo May and Irvin Yalom, for example, Emmy van Deurzen here in the UK. And then later on, coaches as well, Monica Henaway, Anne Lagerstrom, Jamie Reed, Joaquin Martinez in Mexico. So there's a lot of people now who look at their work through this philosophical lens of what is this human condition. And all of us agree that there's certain existential givens. There's a facticity. There's a condition that we cannot escape. And there's this anxiety that we cannot escape unless we stop existing or we continuously distract ourselves from the feeling. And some people do commit suicide and they end their life because they don't want to be with all of this suffering anymore. And this is a huge subject. I'm kind of simplifying it, which is probably not very fair. But the second part is much more interesting when it comes to coaching and much more relevant, because coaches would not work with somebody who's suicidal. But coaches might work with somebody who's continuously distracting themselves from maybe opening their eyes to what is the human experience here. Because the natural tendency, particularly in this day and age, is to avoid discomfort and is to avoid anxiety. So we work 12 hours a day. And some people, when they go on holiday, they can't sit at the beach and meditate, because in stillness, all of the stuff comes up. Yeah. And so they go whitewater rafting, or they do all of these activities, and then they do this, and then they get drunk, and then they do we just have small talk. We watch TV about nothing, and maybe sometimes we watch TV about something. But if it makes us think too much and relate to our own experience and how we make choices, it can bring up this anxiety. And I think a good story will make us think about our human condition. And in fact, the best stories that I know, they are about life and death. They are about significant endings. They are about our human need to belong, but also wanting to be ourselves and individual. They are about this quest for meaning and purpose in a potentially meaningless, absurd world. They are about facing uncertainty, not knowing what to do, having to make choices, sitting in a dilemma, facing our given freedom, having to take responsibility, not wanting responsibility, but wanting freedom. Yeah. So all of these are the existential themes that we all face sooner or later. These are boundary situations when we can't avoid and ignore our human condition and the anxiety that comes with it. And that's what our stories are about. The most popular stories remind us of our human condition. That's why they resonate at such a broad scale, and that's what existential coaching is informed by. We can still do career coaching and help somebody decide, but I have an awareness of my client's relationship with death, with endings, with temporality, with absurdity or meaninglessness, with existential isolation, and with freedom and having to make choices. And if we have that lens on, I can relate to my client better. And also we can sometimes take a step back. And if they understand their relationship with endings, then it's not just about the job that's ending. They can also much better make decisions and make sense of their relationships ending, or a meeting ending, a project ending, a year of their life ending, a decade of their life ending. Birthdays freak a lot of people out, So that's an example of how an existential lens can inform the kind of coaching work.
Yeah, wonderful. For me, I guess that these two distinct words that sort of in some way trying to capture what you've been saying when it comes to existential coaching, which these two things are human being versus human doing. As you talk about a lot of us, a lot of people preoccupied with the doing part, because that is the point that at the end of the day, there's this whole fear or anxiety that if I stop doing something, if I slow down, be still, notice, and listen, I might find something that's either freaking me out or an awareness that there's actually an ending to my life. And hence, at one point of life, I had to ask that some of the existential big questions. What is the purpose and meaning of my life? Do I want to live by default or do I want to live by design? What's the legacy that I want to make? Do I just want to be a consumer or do I want to be a contributor and a carer? Do I want to be, again, someone who always asks to give me, all right? Or someone who will be able, again, to give back. So I think that this sort of, in some ways, it will not do justice, obviously, to capture all the things you just said. But certainly, I think that is the lens that I'm hearing when it comes to that coaching. It's not just about helping the client to achieve what they want right now, but as I said, a bigger, broader picture and perspective of life.
Yeah, I love what you pick up on. Thank you so much for giving it a frame in there. One thing I wanted to pick up on is that being and doing, because that's very interesting in context of coaching, and particularly positive existential coaching. Because if we are only being there and holding space for somebody to sit in their human condition and grapple with it, it's difficult to distinguish it from therapy. I think the doing part is something that is not uniquely, but it is characteristically coaching, right? So that mix, that back and forth between being there with a client and doing something with a client, that back and forth, that tuning in and really being in your perspective and phenomenologically inquiring and holding a space where somebody can allow new meanings to emerge. And then tuning out and maybe seeing, what do I have in my toolbox? There might be a positive psychology intervention, or there might be a piece of theory or a piece of philosophy that I can put on the table. Not to say you should be looking at this and doing something with it, but just saying, here's some knowledge of a person or a piece of science, a piece of research. What do you think about that? It seems quite relevant to what you're experiencing. And in that sense, that holding space and being with somebody, which is very, very powerful, and sometimes it doesn't need more than that. But then sometimes tuning out, looking what's in my box of assumptions that I've made, or what's in the box of knowledge or in the box of philosophy, opening that up and allowing your clients to engage with that is such a beautiful process. And this interplay of tuning in, tuning out, being and doing is something that I just really love. It feels active, but also very considered, very present. And to what extent, what's the balance between those? It really changes on a case-by-case basis, depending on who that client is, how they learn, and what they want.
Yeah, absolutely. As you were sharing, I can't help but have this image in my head. It's like almost having this very intimate, rhythmic, but yet spontaneous dance with someone. At times, it may look a little bit chaotic, but at times, it's sort of in sync, in steps, in tune with one another, depending to what happened during the coaching process, depending on what happened outside the coaching process, depending, again, what the coaches bring to the sessions, and obviously what the clients and coaches bring to the sessions as well. So this is a wonderful kind of image. Is somewhat like a, what do you call it? The tango. I'm not a tango dancer, but I guess I'm more the metaphoric visual type of person. Yeah, that's how I picture
Tango is very close. It used to freak me out when I was a teenager and dancing.
So you did tango before?
I did dance some tango.
Okay.
Very, very rudimentary when I was like 15 or something. Yeah. But the dance metaphor is excellent because often coaching is described as a dance. And what kind of dance it is, this is what I do in supervision quite a lot, exploring what my supervisee's relationship with their client is. You know, what kind of, if it was a dance, what kind of dance would it be? Would you be far away? Would you be touching each other? Would it be very intimate? Would it be side by side, facing the same direction, doing things synchronously? So that's a very interesting question. And I think every coach has to decide what their style is of dancing. And when you have your style of dancing, you can either choose a partner that is a good fit with your style of dancing, or dancing, you need to check each other out. You know, you kind of need to build some rapport and see how it works. And then with time, it can probably get more intimate. I think very few people will start with tango. You know, most people will start with a conversation, you know, at the bar, and then maybe they go to dance later. And I think in coaching, it's similar. You kind of have to get a sense for each other. And I think a good coach will build the kind of trust very quickly to then go and dance. And in dancing is a bit different in that when I and my partner are not in sync, you know, when me and my client, when there's a conflict, when there's a difference, you know, that's a very interesting moment because I think we learn a lot from when somebody either disagrees with us or has a different belief or different values, and you kind of clash in some way. You know, these are times when there's huge potential to learn something. You know, is my client just kind of going with me and adopting what I think? Do they look at me like the expert and, you know, they trust my opinion? I trust my client's opinion way more than mine. You know, I want them to build their own opinion. That's what the existentialists encourage everybody to do. Challenge dogma. Don't necessarily be anti everything, but like challenge what has been accepted without thought. And you might still come to the same conclusions. But really, authenticity is about the courage to do things my way. And as soon as I do that, I create conflict with others who disagree with me. And that can be a difficult place to be in. It can be a lonely place. That's why we say it's lonely at the top. In existential leadership work, there's a lot of people struggling with their position. You know, there's a lot of meaning and a lot of power, perhaps. There's a lot of purpose in being able to make decisions and having people look up to you and follow you and rely on you for guidance. But also you're one level removed. I have that a lot when somebody gets promoted into a management position, for example. And all of a sudden they're not part of the group anymore. They're now one level above. And all of a sudden people relate to them differently, even though they don't feel different. So that can be a difficult experience existentially.
Wow. I mean, like, obviously we can, you know, talk for hours or days of existential coaching. I think that perhaps one other question I'm keen to know, which you mentioned earlier, is in terms of counseling and therapy. So how does coaching differ from counseling and therapy? Because, for example, I wear multiple hats. You know, I'm a registered counselor and I'm a trained mental health clinician, but also a certified coach. So sometimes I do find that there are, I guess, that overlapping area and clear boundaries through. So I'm curious to find out your perspective. How does that differ?
It's another huge question, right? What's the difference between coaching and therapy? Where's the line? I think the better question is, what's the gray area? So there's a few different ways that I have tackled that in the past. So the first, I'm just going to start with that because it came to my mind first. Carol Kaufman, who many positive psychology coaches will know as a very successful coach and also researched into positive psychology and coaching. She wrote a little while ago that coaching follows the trail of dreams, while therapy follows the trail of tears. And I quite like that as a description. I don't think it captures it all in its entirety, but I think it's a good starting point to think about the practice, you know, whereas somebody would see a coach in order to move towards something that they've been dreaming about, something they desire, something that they want to maybe change. Whereas the tendency in therapy is that people feel like they're suffering to a point where they can't cope anymore. You know, and something really painful had happened and they're trying to deal with that. They might still be moving forward. Both of these practices might mean I'm oriented towards the future, a future of less suffering or a future of more well-being.
Yeah.
But that's a good starting point for a distinction. My colleague,
I like that.
Yeah,
I like
my colleague Nash Popovich once in personal consultancy, where they're trying to conceptualize how coaching and counseling might be integrated. What might be an integrative approach to it? He wrote that book together with Deborah Jinks. A really good approach for anybody who's looking to work across the spectrum. That's an interesting one to look into, personal consultancy. But in that book, they write that you can look at it from three different angles. One is what we just said. What's the orientation? Is it towards the future or towards the past? Not always true, but it's a tendency. The other one is, who is the client? Are they generally resourceful and whole? Are they generally well functioning and they want to be better? Which is often coaching. And therapy tends to be people, I hate the word broken, but somebody who might think there's something wrong, a client who might feel like something's not right and they want to fix it. Which is the positive psychology angle is much more what's beyond. Let's not look at what we can fix and get back to normal, but what's beyond. And then also you could argue, this captures a tendency, but certainly many people go to a therapist because they want a deep exploration of self, not because they feel they have some kind of problem. And I really appreciate that. But the tendency is definitely there. Same with coaches. Many coaches work with people who feel they have problems, and something's really not right. And they really do fantastic work. So it doesn't, again, in its own, it doesn't capture it, but it's a good starting point. And the other one, the third one is that many therapists work with deep transformational change. And many coaches, or most coaches, maybe not most coaches, but many coaches traditionally work with behavior change, more surface level change. And again, there's a lot of coaches who do fantastically deep work and very ethically and very informed by their training. And there are therapists who help you change some behavior on the surface level. And that will help them to maybe inspire some more deep-seated change. So again, on its own, it doesn't capture it, but all three together give you a certain sense.
Yeah, excellent summary. Seriously, I understand that I've asked a lot of big questions, but thank you so much for explaining them and putting them into very succinct and concise manner. I only have just one more questions for you, Yannick. And this got nothing to do with coaching, but more at a personal level, in the sense that what is the one thing that you have been intentionally doing this week to look after your own well-being?
I built a succulent garden. This was about maybe 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. I started to get really, really busy with work. And I was working quite long hours at the time, and I realized I needed to do something, some form of where I can just be fully present. I had an injury, and so I used to do a certain sport, and it didn't really work anymore. So it wasn't conscious at the time, but I just I got more and more little succulents, little cactuses. And I realized that when I'm taking care of them, when I'm watering them, when I'm checking who needs water and who doesn't, what's the position, it was such a mindfulness exercise. And very quickly I realized, I'm being super mindful. Some people do that when they're cooking, for example, or when they do exercise, or when they read, or so many ways to be mindful. For me, it was taking care of my plants. And so last week, very intentionally, I set time apart to just make sure that everything's going, because I know it gives me so much.
Thank you for sharing that. Well, I'm afraid that that's all the time that we have for today. Once again, thank you for joining us. And if you want to engage Yannick's expertise in positive existential coaching and literature training, you can visit his website. It's called Existential Coach. Existential.coach. Did I get it right?
Yes, that's right. Existential.coach.
And of course, if you are practicing coaches or aspire to become coach, you can also check out his website called rocketsupervision.com. So that's rocketsupervision.com. Thank you for watching. I'm Adimus from Strong Optimizers, and we're here to bring out the best in you by optimizing your strengths. Have a fabulous day, everyone. Thanks again, Yannick, for joining us. Goodbye.
Thank you, Adimus. Thank you for your questions. Bye-bye.